Hello, and welcome to The Energetic Psyche, Season 3, Episode 7, When Collapse Becomes Initiation. Unearthing your favorite version of yourself. I'm Dr. Adrian Campbell, and I'm really glad you're here. For the past year or so, I've been thinking deeply about how to bring everything I've learned over the last 15 years together in a way that would be most helpful to those I work with. I've studied a lot and I've experienced a lot, but all this expansion didn't begin with some brilliant moment of clarity. It actually began with burnout. At the time, I was teaching electronics at a nuclear power plant. I was deeply analytical, highly productive, and very much identified with achievement. I had adopted the identity my culture told me was necessary to be considered successful. I was disciplined, strong, reliable, and always delivering. And I was exhausted. I was working 5 to 6 days a week, routinely 10 to 14-hour days. Running at 110% was normal for me, and wanting rest felt like weakness. On top of that schedule, I was also playing roller derby. I was pushing my brain all week, and on top of it, I was pushing my body even harder. Now, to be fair, I did love it. I loved the work I did. I loved the intensity of the high performance environment, and I loved the physicality of roller derby. But all of it together was a lot. My entire life, I had treated my body and my brain as tools, things to train, optimize, command, and to rely on to get things done. Looking back, I didn't just have an unhealthy relationship with my body. I had an unhealthy relationship with myself. I had shaped myself to fit a cultural mold of success. And what that mold handed back to me was illness. I was only 31 years old, and I was in constant pain. When I sought help through conventional channels, I was essentially told that this was just my life now. Daily medication, stress management, and adapting my work routine and schedule. But I refused to give up because you know what? I'm stubborn. And that refusal, that became my turning point. I began looking outside the standard cultural models for help, and that's when I found acupuncture. After only a few weeks, the results genuinely shocked me. I remember thinking, okay, so if this works, what else is out there? And that's the question that really did change everything for me. I often say acupuncture saved my life. And looking back, I can say it not only brought my body back to life, but it led me to practices and ways of being in the world that have created a much more beautiful life for me to live. Because from there, I began to explore. And I found Reiki, meditation, yoga, and as my curiosity expanded, I enrolled in grad school, and I began studying depth psychology, somatic psychology, neuropsychology. I immersed myself in all the ways that psyche and soma shape one another, and how we in turn shape each other. The journey also led me back to my military and first responder roots, which I had quietly distanced myself from after leaving the Coast Guard, because there was a lot of healing that needed to take place there too. Now, this wasn't a simple or easy path because while all of this internal expansion was happening, I was still working in high-stress environments, still measured by output, still navigating systems that valued performance above integration. It led to a lot of internal dissonance. I often felt like I was being pulled in separate directions, and I struggled. I really did to figure out how to bring my worlds together. So I finally stepped out of the corporate world and began building my own work. It was during this time of freedom and movement that something fundamental shifted for me. During this time, my body stopped being a tool. My time became precious to me, and I began to listen to myself in ways I hadn't had the freedom to explore before. The more classes I taught, the more clients I worked with, the more I started to see the cause of our suffering more clearly. Over time, I noticed a pattern. The people who struggled the most were not weak. They were not lazy. They were not incapable. They were fragmented. Culturally, we are conditioned to become one thing. They tell us choose a label, choose a role, choose an identity, and then perform it well. But human beings are layered, we're contradictory, archetypal, expansive. When parts of us don't fit the chosen role, the softness, the ambition, the grief, the creativity, the spirituality, we don't eliminate them, we exile them. These parts of us are absorbed into the unconscious and become shadow elements, never truly disappearing, but instead creating an internal dissonance that refuses to be ignored. These shadow elements can show up as anxiety, chronic stress, overfunctioning. Sometimes they're merely as subtle. These shadow elements can show up as anxiety, chronic stress, or overfunctioning. Sometimes they are merely a subtle but persistent sense that you are succeeding, but not fully inhabiting your life. Something just kind of always feels off. When the body speaks what psyche cannot, you might see symptoms of hypertension, migraines, lower back pain, IBS, autoimmune flares, fatigue, and unfortunately, so much more. The unconscious always finds a way to express itself, and unfortunately, the harder we try to ignore it, the more unpleasant it usually becomes. What I have come to realize is that authenticity is regulation. When who you are and how you live are aligned, the nervous system feels at home. There is less internal dissonance, less bracing, less masking, and from that place, capacity expands. Clear thinking sharpens, boundaries strengthen, leadership deepens, and relationships stabilize. You don't just become yourself, you become your favorite version of yourself. But integration requires courage. It asks you to notice where you edited yourself to fit, where parts of you went quiet in the process, where you abandoned your own needs to preserve a sense of belonging, where you abandoned your dreams because they complicated the narrative, where you maintained the constructed image while the inner life quietly split. This is not inspirational fluff. This is shadow work, and shadow work requires strength. When I step back and look at my 15 years of study, practice, teaching, and embodied work, I realize everything I do can be understood through 3 interwoven dimensions of human experience. Not modalities, not techniques, but fundamental ways that we experience ourselves internally and in the world. When these dimensions are split apart, we feel fragmented. When they are integrated, we feel whole. Psyche, soma, and soul are as Psyche, soma, and soul, or as I'm calling it for these purposes anyhow, power, presence, and flow. Power. This is reclaiming internal authority, understanding who you are beneath the conditioning, examining the narratives that shaped you, and remembering that worthiness was never something you had to earn. Power is not dominance. It is alignment with your own depth. Presence. Learning to live from within your body again. Strengthening nervous system capacity through connection, not force. Developing the ability to remain grounded and aware, especially under pressure. Presence allows you to stay with yourself. And then flow. Designing a life that supports who you actually are. Aligning your work, relationships, habits, and commitments with your internal truth so that effort becomes sustainable rather than depleting. Flow is what happens when psyche, soma, and soul move in the same direction. Because power without presence becomes force. Presence without power becomes passivity. and flow without the first two becomes chaos. But together, they create integration. Integration restores authenticity, and authenticity softens the nervous system. And from this place, aliveness returns. Let's pause here for a short somatic practice. If this isn't available to you in this moment, that's okay. You can always listen along and come back later. If it is available, I'm going to invite you to allow your posture to shift just slightly so that you feel a little bit more grounded and supported in this moment. You can close your eyes or soften your gaze. I'm going to invite you to take one long, slow inhale and then release with an even longer, slower exhale. We're going to do that again. Nice, slow inhale. Longer, slower exhale. One last time. Nice, slow inhale. Longer, slower exhale. And then releasing any control over your breathing. I invite you to gently bring awareness into your body. Where in your body do you most feel like yourself right now? Is there an area that feels solid, steady, or maybe just free from constraint? And where might you feel some division, tightness, tension? Maybe like you're being pulled in different directions. We're not trying to fix anything here. We're just noticing. Now I'll invite you to release these sensations. Take another long, deep inhale, followed by a slow, intentional exhale. And I'm going to invite you to consider the following questions as I ask them very slowly. Where in your life have you outsourced your authority? Where have you allowed others' expectations to define who you are? Where do you override your body? What sensations do you regularly ignore? What would it mean to stay with yourself instead of pushing past yourself? And now, if your outer life truly reflected your inner life, what would need to shift? Think about where things feel too hard. Where does ease want to enter? Now take one more nice, slow breath. And notice what feels most alive for you in this moment. Now, when you're ready, I invite you to gently open your eyes and return to the present. What I really want to share with you now is that over this past year, I've been quietly distilling all of this work I've shared with you into something cohesive. Not a reinvention, not a refinement, but a structured way to walk through what I have seen again and again. When shadow is acknowledged, when the unconscious is made conscious, when the body is listened to rather than overridden, life begins to ease. Not because circumstances disappear, but because you are no longer divided against yourself. Power, presence, and flow is the container I've created for that journey. It is a 9-week curated container designed for depth, not speed. I'm starting with a founding cohort, a small committed circle designed for meaningful reflection, integration, and shared depth. I'll have weekly teaching videos, only 30 to 45 minutes per week, guided somatic and reflective practices for you to choose from, downloadable journal pages allowing you to build your own integration binder, and we'll have live integration calls for shared depth and reflection with the cohort. This container is designed to support clarity, embodiment, and meaningful alignment, not to create more work or overwhelm. The program's self-paced within each week, allowing intentional movement and the option to slow down when something asks for deeper presence. I am limiting this cohort to 9 individuals, with enrollment taking place by conversation or invitation only. If this speaks to you, not as urgency, but as recognition, I invite you to visit my website, energeticpsyche.com, to learn more. And if you'd like, you can schedule a conversation with me so we can explore whether this first round feels aligned for you. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to connecting with you soon. If this podcast resonates with you, please be sure to subscribe so you can be notified of future episodes.